Hello, hi, welcome in and welcome back. I'm going to give you a quick little intro before I jump into the episode that I have put together for you today. And just let you know that this episode is going to be about a sensitive topic. I'm going to be touching on drug and substance use and abuse within the gay community. This is a topic that is really controversial. This is a topic that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, gay, straight alike. And so I wanted to just give a couple of resources before I even went into anything or talked about anything. I wanted to first let you know to, again, take what you need and leave the rest. I understand that I am not going to get this topic exactly right. I understand that I am not going to hit every point that needs to be hit when it comes to this. This is a really complex and dynamic issue, but I've put together something that I think, in my opinion, I have honestly, to be honest with you, I have edited and gone back and forth about I should touch on this, I should touch on that. So if I missed something, I apologize. But anyway, I just want to let you know there's going to be a lot of information that's put here, and not all of it is going to be perfect. So if there's something that I say that you don't agree with or don't like, I invite you to reach out to me. I invite you to let me know in a way that's respectful or respectable. Don't cuss me out. And yeah, I just want to kind of throw that in there. But I want to give you a couple of resources first, because I know that this is a really touchy subject. So if you, and I feel obligated to do this too, because I think it's the right thing to do. If you or someone you know is experiencing troubles with substance use or addiction, there is a 24/7 hotline by the Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration. This is in the US. So if you're outside of the US, I'm not sure what the number would be. But the US number is 1-844-289-0879. I will put that number below. And also 988 is a crisis line number that you can call or text 24/7. And there is someone there who is going to be trained to help you if you're in a crisis. So I wanted to throw that out there. And I also wanted to invite you to the episode. But also, if this is going to be a topic that's too touchy for you, or that you're maybe not ready to listen to, or something that you're uncomfortable with, this is your warning about that now, because we're going to talk about some things. And with that, let's go. Hello, welcome back again. My name is still Dustin. This is still the Boy Meets Therapy podcast that I've put together. So I gave you a brief little intro, but I want to tell you about some of the information that I've put together. So this is something that I've gotten people messaging me to talk about. This is something that I see a lot that I've wanted to talk about, but I felt really intimidated to take on this topic because I feel like there's no perfect way to talk about it. So what I've done is I have put together the best information that I have that includes like historical contexts, that includes a lot of mental health things and clinical research. So I'm hoping that this can be a good representation of the topic, but I recognize that there's no perfect way to do it, as I said before. So I think it needs to be talked about though. So drug use, substance use, and abuse within the gay community. This is something that a lot of us are aware of. This is something that I am acutely aware of. And I'm going to bring some personality into the session. I'm going to bring some like personal stuff. I don't usually share this, but I have been sober since 2017. So that decision was made because I got way out of control. And I had a relationship with drugs and alcohol that I was not comfortable with. And so that was kind of the motivator for me going into my decision to kind of like, okay, we got to do something about this and kind of move into the sober route. But that does not mean that I do not believe that there is kind of, I don't know if this is a good way to say this, but an ethical way to use drugs or substances. That doesn't mean that I think that, it's kind of like I did it in third grade. I don't know, like the dare stuff that we all know. It's kind of like everything that you hear about drugs or alcohol is terrible, 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 because come on, like that's unrealistic. People are going to do these things. A lot of people can safely use these things. Some people can't. And so I want to give that like differentiation before I go into this. But I also wanted to just bring some information in about myself, just so that you don't think that I'm just reading out of a textbook or reading out of a history book or something, and there's no personal experience here, because I am really intimately aware of this topic and how it influenced me personally and a lot of my friends, a lot of people around me. So I wanted to bring that in before I said anything else. So with that, I am also, let me mention this as well. I'm not here to tell you to stop using drugs or that you're a drug addict or that you are, I don't even like that term, or that you have an issue, blah, 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 blah. That's not what I'm doing here. So I don't want you to think that the end message is going to be me trying to deliver you into some like beautiful gift of sobriety, whatever. Some people are comfortable with the way that they use substances and they don't have any distressing consequences, or, there are a lot of things. People are different, right? Okay. We know that. Okay. So I wanted to bring that into awareness as well. That was already a mouthful. What's going on? So I wanted to touch on this. So too often when the topic of substance use comes up, it's framed in extremes. This is either in a sensationalized headline about chemsex or in moralizing takes about how sobriety is the only option. But reality that we know is much more complex than this. Drug use in the gay community has deep cultural and historical roots. It's tied to pleasure, it's tied to coping, it's tied to connection, it's tied to survival. It's also tied to a lot of pain. So I want to kind of touch on a lot of those things too. And again, say, I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here to tell you that sobriety is the only way forward. Sobriety is valid, but so is harm reduction, and so is responsible recreational use. What I want to do really is to open a space for an honest conversation, one where we can hold all the different ways that substances show up in queer lives. So why do we need to even talk about this? Why is this a thing? So research shows that gay and bisexual men report higher rates of alcohol, stimulant, and club drug use than heterosexual men. That's from a study from 2020. And I should mention, I'm not exactly sure how it has changed since then. I tried to do like a super deep dive on this, but this is so much information that I was putting together that I was like, I can't obsess over certain things. So there may be some differences in that data if that study were conducted now, but pretty consistently it shows up that way, we see in research. So these statistics alone don't explain why. And the truth is, there's nothing about being gay in itself that makes someone inherently more likely to use drugs. What shapes the reality of this is history, stigmatization, culture, and the search for belonging. So here's some historical context here when it comes to gay men and usage in the community. So for much of the 20th century, bars and clubs have been some of the only semi-safe spaces for queer people to gather. Alcohol has been woven into those spaces, not just as a drink, but as a part of the community's fabric. If you wanted to meet with other gay men, you went to the bar. And I think this is something that a lot of us are aware of. And when I did the episode on friendship, one of the things that I got a lot of feedback on was how people felt, and I addressed this in the episode and in some of the posts that I made, but one of the things that I got a lot of feedback on was how people genuinely feel that there is no other space for them to connect with other gay men, which obviously that's not 100% true because there are spaces, but we have to acknowledge that that has been historically the biggest space where we've gathered, has been bars, nightlife, these spaces. So that history in itself explains why alcohol and nightlife are still so central to queer culture today, and why drinking has often been linked with visibility, identity, and belonging. So we have to go back a little bit further too. So we can't talk about the queer community without mentioning the impact that the AIDS crisis has had on it. So in the 1980s and 90s, the AIDS crisis devastated queer communities. As a consequence of this, many men turned to drugs or alcohol to cope with grief, loss, and fear of death. Substances helped dull the pain of losing entire friend groups or facing relentless stigma. And this is not just stigma within the community from people that may or may not be perceived to be HIV positive, but outside of the community in general. and this whole craze that went around gay people being connected with HIV and AIDS. At the same time, activist groups like ACT UP pushed for compassion. And they didn't just push for compassion around the treatment and prevention of HIV and AIDS, but also around the humanity of gay men that were navigating substance use in the middle of this crisis. That's a mouthful. That's a lot. And I understand that myself and other people that were not alive during this period can struggle to understand or even have a glimpse of the gravity of the loss that was experienced during that time. So I want to bring that up, and I want to mention that as well. I'm also going to link a book below. It's by Walt Odets, who is one of my favorite authors. He's a clinical psychologist. He has a book called In the Shadow of the Epidemic that talks a lot about those experiences that I am going to recommend. I actually don't think it's on my reading list. I think I'm going to add it there too. So let's talk about the rise of chemsex and meth use, because we can't talk about drugs in the gay community without this. So in the late 1990s and 2000s, chemsex, or as we know today, party and play, became more visible. This is often linked with drugs like meth or GHB in sexual contexts. So for some people, this was about pleasure. This was about enhancing erotic connection, breaking down sexual shame, experimenting with desire. For others, it was about coping. Using substances made intimacy feel safer, or to overcome the barriers of fear and stigma that they felt. Meth in particular spread through some urban gay hubs because it increased energy, extended sex, and lowered inhibitions. Public health campaigns often leaned on scare tactics. So this means showing destruction and despair. But those consequences often ignored the fact that for many gay men, drugs weren't just about escape. They were about joy, intimacy, and feeling free. So I want to pause here for a second, because I want to also recognize the harm that meth has done to the gay community and that it continues to do within the gay community. I just want to take a moment, because I feel like making a statement or a claim that I just made has to come with some recognition of the many times irreversible damage that it's done to our communities. So pleasure and agency, what does that have to do with anything? So this is an elephant. This is an element that we often miss. So queer drug use is also just not about pain or pathology. It's also about pleasure, exploration, and agency. For generations, queer sexuality was policed and shamed. In that context, choosing to use substances to heighten desire or explore intimacy can feel like reclaiming what was denied. This is the right to pleasure without an apology or apologizing for your desires or what you're interested in. So there's a scholar, Kane Race, in 2009, calls this the queer politics of drugs, where drug use becomes a part of how queer people negotiate pleasure, community, and freedom. By recognizing pleasure as a part of the story, we can resist framing gay men only as victims of substances. We also acknowledge agency, even when risks are involved. So there's also a couple of other things that are happening here. At the same time, we cannot ignore the pressures that shape these choices. So I've referred to this psychologist a lot. This is Dr. Elon Meyer. And Dr. Meyer in 2003 described minority stress. This is a study. I reference this study constantly. So minority stress is essentially the chronic burden of stigma, discrimination, and rejection. Substances can feel like a shortcut to relief, to confidence, to relaxation, or to belonging. But when gay men struggle with addiction, they often face a double stigmatization. What does that mean? We have society that is stigmatizing us for being gay, and then we have people within the gay community that sometimes stigmatize us for our drug use. That can leave people feeling even more isolated, which can make support even harder to access. So we cannot continue talking about this topic without mentioning the intersectionality of it. So it's important to say that not all experiences with drugs in queer spaces are the same. Race, class, and HIV status all shape how drug use is lived and how it is judged. That's a big term there, of how drug use is judged based on race. So here's a quick thing, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about this after I say it. So Black and Latino gay men have often been disproportionately criminalized for drug use while being underrepresented in recovery spaces. So what does that mean? We know that men of color in the United States are criminalized more often than white men are for drug-related crimes. So we incorporate that piece of information. And then we also incorporate this information that they are underrepresented in spaces of recovery. So that means you go into a recovery meeting and there is I don't want to say overrepresentation. I don't know if that is a fair word, but there is an overrepresentation of white gay men going through the recovery process or, working towards sobriety. So what does that mean? That means if I am a Black or Latin gay man and I am experiencing substance use, it might be more difficult for me to connect with a white man who even has a similar experience when it comes to substance use, especially when it comes to the way that I am perceived, the way that people treat me around my substance use, the way that society or my community is talking about it. There are differences in intersectionality there that have to be considered when it comes to substances. And as a white gay man in sobriety, like I also can't pretend to understand that experience. So I don't want to go too deep into that, even when referring to studies or clinical research, because that's an experience that I don't have. I would need to have somebody on here to really talk more about that specifically. But going on with this, HIV positive men may experience different dynamics around substances, intimacy, and stigma than HIV negative men. What does that mean? That means that a gay man who is HIV positive might have a different experience when it comes to their dynamics around substances than an HIV negative man. And that has a lot to do with stigma, with people who aren't acutely aware of what it means to be HIV positive. There's a lot of factors that go into this. So, class, men with financial privilege may access safer drugs or supportive networks, while those without may face more risks and less compassion. This is something that I really want to touch on. If you can buy the good drugs versus someone who can't, it doesn't mean that you're using drugs in a different way. And I know that that's like a weird thing to say, but I think it needs to be said. So let's talk about generational differences as well, because there's also a generational story that's happening here. For older gay men, drug use may be linked to surviving trauma from the AIDS crisis, substances as a way to numb grief or reclaim pleasure in the face of loss. For younger gay men, drugs might be more tied to hookup apps, to nightlife, or chemsex culture. Sometimes it's about exploration. Sometimes it's about pressure. Understanding these differences can help us see that drug use isn't just an individual issue. It's part of a larger cultural timeline. So what do we see today? So today we're seeing important changes. Many more queer men are experiencing what responsible recreational use looks like: setting boundaries, knowing your limits, practicing harm reduction, and making informed choices. At the same time, queer affirming recovery spaces are growing alongside sober and sober curious communities building alternatives to bar culture. What this tells us is that there isn't one path, there are many. Sobriety works for some people, harm reduction works for others, and for some, mindful and intentional use is their choice. What matters is that we start talking about it honestly, without shame, so people have real options and real support. And again, this is an issue that is really touchy and it's really difficult to speak on because there are so many different ways that people go about this. There are so many different ways that people use drugs, abuse drugs. The same thing with alcohol, same thing when you involve sex. There's so many different things that are happening. One of the things that I would encourage you to think about is if you are concerned about your alcohol or drug use, talk to the people around you. Because sometimes our friends, the people that are out with us, know things that we don't, or they recognize or catch patterns that we don't. So if you're curious about, I've been a little uncomfortable recently about the way that I've been drinking, right? You could ask a friend. If you want to take a step back, take a step back. If you want to have more conversation about it, have more conversation about it. If you feel like you don't have a large network of friends around you to really ask, I would encourage you to think about what it means to you. You know, just because you are drinking a lot doesn't mean that you meet criteria for a substance use disorder. Just because you are drinking a lot and it's not distressing to you doesn't mean that you don't meet criteria for a substance use disorder. I'm also not saying that you have to change your life based on what the criteria for a substance use disorder is. There's a lot of things that are happening here, and there's no perfect way for me to say it. But if you feel like you're curious about it, ask questions about it. Even if it's just yourself, look more into it. You can even go to a recovery meeting and see, hey, do I relate to the people around me? Are their experiences similar to mine? If yes, then look more into it. If not, then don't. You don't have to go. Then don't go back. There's another piece to this puzzle. And the other piece is connection. For many men, substances become a gateway to intimacy, confidence, or belonging. They don't have to be the only pathway, and they shouldn't be the only pathway. They should not. But one of the things that we have to consider is, it's interesting. I have friends that have told me before, when I go out, I just have to have a couple of drinks so that I can get warmed up so that I feel more comfortable talking to people. And there's validity in that, right? Like, that's everybody. Sometimes it's like I'm going to have a drink or two so that I can feel more comfortable so that I can, maybe ask someone out or maybe whatever. But I would also encourage you to think about your ability to connect without it. What does that look like? If you get to a point where you feel like you are unable to connect without it, I would say I would just be curious about it and say, what's going on? Like, what's really blocking me here? Is there like a fear of rejection? Is there a fear of other things that are going on? Because they probably are, but I would just encourage you to be curious about it. So building queer spaces that center creativity, spirituality, sports, activism, or just joy outside of substances can give us alternatives, not as replacements for those who use, but as more choices. So no one feels that drugs or alcohol are the only door into queer life. So there's a couple of other things here. The way that we connect, the way that we show up, we have to acknowledge that, and this is me, I'm going off of the script a little bit here. And I'm saying this because I'm going to go into like some personal experience. For me, when I was first going out, when I was first introduced into the gay bars and the gay nightlife, which is, again, like I mentioned before, very different from my interpretation and the things that I do now. But when I first got in, I was a kid from a small town in Georgia, and I started going out in Atlanta, and I was so interested and intrigued by this life. I was 21 and I was going out to gay bars for the first time. And, I'm someone who didn't grow up in a town that had any representation of gay people. In fact, I think me and like one or two other guys in my high school were the representation of gay people for our town. Which, what we were just like stupid kids. But I remember my feeling of getting lost in it. I was like, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of what's happening. And that was drinking. There was a lot of drinking going on. So I was like, if I want to be a part of this, I gotta do what everybody else does. And at the time, I wasn't really familiar with, especially, particularly anything that I've talked about. But I just didn't really have anybody around me that was really like a good guiding force. And that's not to say that there aren't good guiding forces in the gay community, because there are, obviously. But I have to consider where I was going and the people that I was consistently placing myself around. And so, especially when it comes to young queer men, this is a topic that's really, really sensitive to me personally because I just remember being that young queer man and this is when I was 21. This was 10 years ago, and I remember being so infatuated with this life of not only being around people that were gay like me, and there was this radical acceptance in these communities and when I went out and different parts of town, but also just like wanting to do what everyone else did. And so for me, I got a little lost in it. And that's not what happens to everybody. But I think the reason that I really, really am sensitive to this issue was because things maybe could have been different. I mean, things happened the way that they did, and I'm really grateful that they did. But I just think about a lot of younger people in the community that really need good people around them and that really need people that could show them a good example of what it means to have fun and to have boundaries and to have limits and to know when to stop and to know when to look out for their friends. I think a big thing for me too was I had some friends around me when I was around like 23 that were like, hey, we need to talk about last night. And that feeling used to just create this huge pit in my stomach. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do last night? But I think those conversations are some of the ones that really brought stuff like that to my attention. And I really, really, really care about queer people. I just love queer people. I love being around queer people. I love all of it. And so this is such a big topic because substance use within our community can get pretty bad. And again, I'm not here to tell you to not, if you're going out with friends to not do whatever. I'm just saying there's a way to be responsible about it. And I think, yeah, for me, when I see younger gay men, I'm very particularly like, I really try to be like, I don't know where they're at. I don't know if this is their third or fourth time in a gay bar. Like, I don't know I don't know what their experience is. I just try to show up in a way that tells them, hey, I can have fun without, absolutely losing myself, because I've seen that happen with people and it's really, really sad. And yeah, I'm getting real personal. I've had friends like pass away from their meth use and from overdoses. Like it's just it's really, really tough. So I think this issue is really, really, really close to my heart because I feel like in a lot of ways I could have been them. And sometimes I even think, why them and not me? And so to avoid getting, way too sentimental, the information that I've like presented is ultimately just to have a conversation about it, because I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the exact statistics, but I do know that this is something that people come to me and that I talk with people about all the time, is this fear of missing out, fear of not feeling connected to other people, fear of going out and I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things there. I kind of wish there was like somebody else here in this conversation to kind of riff off of, because this is just such a deep topic. And I'm going to be honest with you. I even thought about like whether or not I wanted to even record this episode, because I thought I'm going to say something that is going to be wrong, and that somebody is going to be like, I can't believe he said that or whatever. And so that was like a huge fear for me coming up when even broaching this topic. So, but I was like, you know what? Do it anyway. Do it afraid. And so, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm riffing at this point, but I think I touched on a couple issues that I wanted to. I just want us to be happy and healthy. And girl, do I go out with my friends, and they get drunk, and we have fun and whatever? Of course I do. But I think when we have to have an honest conversation with our friend, I do feel there's a responsibility there for us to do that. Can I control what somebody is or is not going to do? No. What I can do is show up for them. What I can do is not force my fucking opinions down their throat. And I could just be there, and I can set boundaries, and I can cut things off if they need to be cut off. But ooh, I'm getting deep. Okay. I see, part of me wants to cut this out. I'm not going to. So if you take one thing from this conversation, let it be this: gay men and drug use. It's not a story of a moral failure. It's a story of history, of stigma, of pleasure, of survival, of resilience. And the path forward is not one size fits all. It's not about saying everyone should be sober or everyone should party. It's about creating space for honest conversations that are free of shame, where each person can choose what works for them, whether that's sobriety, harm reduction, or responsible recreational use. At its core, this is about dignity. Dignity in how we understand ourselves, dignity in how we treat each other, and dignity in how we create a community where nobody feels alone in their choices. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. There are so many things that I feel like I wanted to say and didn't say, but I thought, you know what, I can't say everything. So I'm going to leave it at that. And maybe you'll message me or something, your thoughts or anything like that. I also want to mention there's a lot of things on intersectionality that I feel like I wanted to touch on as well when it comes to communities of color, gay men of color, particularly regarding the way that drugs and substances are viewed, and also regarding HIV and HIV status. There's so much there. So I think I'm going to compile some more information on that and get some input from people, because obviously that's not a story that I am going to be able to 100% accurately convey, because I just can't. So that's something that I want to go more into, and I want you to consider as well, because the way that we look at white people who do drugs versus the way that we look at people of color that do drugs in our society in general is different. And I think that's also a conversation that needs to happen too. So I just did some heavy stuff here. Again, I'm going to put some resources down below if you need them on my website. There's a blog, and there are some resources that you can go and use if you want more information on this stuff. But with that, I think I'm going to leave it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. If you made it this far, like and subscribe. I hate myself. I hate myself for saying that. But it's the world we live in. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and bye.